Good evening, and welcome to Junpei's Believe It or Don't. There are many strange things in this world. Legend has it, late at night, after everyone has gone home, a maniacal ghost roams the halls and devours any comes across.
Absolute cinema. Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rustel, and you're watching episode 2 of my P3R review series. Brace yourselves because, my god, do we have a lot to talk about today. Between my last video and this one, I played for about one in-game month. I already had prepared a script and everything. I was right about to start production, but then I made a mistake. You see, I kept playing. I figured, hey, the game gave me a new party member. Everything's fine. Surely the game is not gonna throw another set of mechanics at me like it's nothing, right? I'm done. I can write the script. Turned out that there's a lot more that gets revealed to you right after. I'll try and make it interesting, so just relax, enjoy the video, and let's dive into the first chapter on the list. I'd like to open up with a disclaimer that I changed microphones in the middle of this editing process. I've tried to keep it as consistent as possible throughout the entire video, but if you notice any differences, that's why. With that out of the way, let's talk about the writing and the story of this arc. There's a lot to be said about this part of the game and how the writing has evolved since my first episode, but let's start by diving into social links. If you watched my previous episode, you may have been a bit surprised that I didn't make any mentions of them whatsoever. The reason was that I found them to be too similar from each other, and I didn't really see where their story would lead. In short, they came off as very flat to me, and I didn't talk about them because I just didn't know what to say. It takes you a couple ranks before you actually get to hear about their lives, and you find out that a lot of them are struggling with pretty difficult situations. Now, I'm not going to talk about it with too much detail because the point of my analysis is not to spoil you. I'll just give out two examples that I thought were pretty memorable. One is that you have a classmate who tells you that they have a disabled nephew that they take care of. There's also this other girl that seems to avoid you and be scared of you. Once you get her trust, you find out that she has an abusive father and that she's scared of men in general as a result of that. And I don't know, it seems to be a recurring theme that people that you meet end up having pretty difficult lives outside of school. Discovering these things actually has made a good impression on me, and now I'm kind of interested to see where those characters will go and evolve throughout the story. Also, I wanted to make quick mention of the fact that every event with social links are actually fully voiced out, which is quite cool in my opinion. Of course, the most important part remains to be the main story, and wow, does the game deliver on that. In order to illustrate my point, allow me to rewind the video a little bit and go all the way back to...
Good evening.
This scene, right there. It may not seem like much, but this one scene has single-handedly changed my whole opinion regarding this game's writing and dialogue. It's funny, it fits with Junpei's character, it's well delivered, and believe it or not, it's actually very relevant to the main plot. Speaking of which, there's something I had missed in my first video. Basically, as the cases of apathy syndrome grow within the city, you will see more and more people that are afflicted by it in the streets, in the stations, pretty much everywhere you go. That shifts the ambience quite drastically. What I found especially disturbing is that despite the fact that every other location is practically overrun by zombified people, the soundtrack never changes. It simply remains very upbeat and uplifting. While we're on the subject of apathy syndrome, we also get the chance to see the first symptoms developing in someone on the 29th of May. Now, the reason why this entire month is so packed with story-related content is because of a single person. Your seniors at the dorm have figured out that there is another Persona user out there. In fact, it happens to be someone that goes to your school. Her name is Fuuka, and she goes to another class within your grade. Unfortunately, there's a bit of an issue with that because, as it turns out, she is often absent, doesn't show up to school, and is quite often in the hospital. Deciding that perhaps having a member that is prone to getting sick is not the best fit for going into Tartarus, your seniors quickly abandon that idea. Now, high school being high school means that there are a lot of rumors just going around all the time. One of these rumors is that there could be a ghost within the building. Most people don't believe it at first, but as the month of May goes by, more and more strange events happen on campus that start to fuel that rumor a little bit. One morning, a girl is found unconscious on the school premises before the gates are even open. This happens a second time, and at this point, people really believe that the only explanation for this is that there must be something supernatural happening. Obviously, your team finds that to be strange and decides to investigate. Over the course of an entire week, you will hear different rumors from different people and try and piece up what happened, until you find out that there is one piece of the puzzle that seems to tie every one of these cases together. Her name is Fuuka. As it turns out, the girls that keep showing up unconscious on campus are all related to Fuuka because they are bullying her. And now all of these weird occurrences on campus are actually pointing back towards the main plot. With that information, you are able to tell Mitsuru what actually happened. She quickly tries and set up a meeting with one of the bullies and the teacher of that class, during which the bully actually admits that what they've done to Fuuka is that 10 days ago, they locked her up inside of the gym room before leaving the school premises for the night. They returned the next day and they found out that the gym room was still completely locked, but Fuuka was not inside. What happened next is that each one of the bullies started hearing voices that asked them to go back and apologize to Fuuka. This is what led them to go on campus during the night, and that implies that they may have been exposed to Tartarus, or at least shadows. In fact, the case of apathy syndrome that I mentioned earlier that you get to see is one of the bullies. The bully that you're talking to right now is the last one that hasn't actually heard those voices yet. The reason why we had not considered the fact that Fuuka had disappeared is because the teacher of that class had been covering it up the whole time. With that piece of information, everything becomes a lot more clear because now we know where Fuuka may be. She's in Tartarus. And here I have to praise the game and the writing because it's the first time in this game that we've been given a very clear, logical and rational objective as part of the cease. We must rescue Fuuka. She could be in extreme danger. We believe that she has a persona, but we don't even really know what kind of power she has. And even if she has a persona, she doesn't have an evoker, she doesn't have any kind of training, and she's completely alone inside of Tartarus. Now the issue is we don't know where she ended up within Tartarus. So Akihiko proposes a plan. Perhaps we should try and enter Tartarus the same way that she did, as in by locking ourselves within the gym room overnight and waiting for the dark hour to occur. We get a very cool scene where we infiltrate the school during the middle of the night to try and find the gym key, after which we decide that it is best for the team to split in two. You, Akihiko, and Junpei are going to stay within the gym room, while Mitsuru and Yukari are going to enter Tartarus like usual. Before talking about finding Fuuka, I just wanted to make a quick mention that this character is introduced with so much context. I would be willing to say that the entire month of May is dedicated to introducing her, even though we haven't even seen her, we just heard her name. That contrasts so much with how Junpei was introduced, and that was a huge critique in my first episode, so this is great. This is well done. I love this. Either way, the dark hour happens, and it turns out that entering Tartarus this way is not very ideal. You and your teammates are completely split up, and Mitsuru is unable to reach you because you are so far away from her. You have a little section where you walk around the place completely on your own, trying to find your teammates. I thought it was going to be threatening because I would be alone, but the enemies are very weak in this section, so it ended up being a cakewalk. Eventually, you do run into Junpei and Akihiko, and turns out that Fuuka was hiding right behind us the whole time. The group is actually surprised to find her completely safe and not harmed by the shadows. She explains that she doesn't really understand what's going on, but inside of her she can feel where the shadows are, and that has kept her safe this whole time. Akihiko gives her an evoker, and he does tell her that it's not a real gun. It doesn't shoot bullets or anything like that. Someone also mentions the word persona around her, but unfortunately, her awakening that is right about to happen is still loaded with some issues, I would say. It's at this point that Junpei mentions that the moon is very big tonight, which prompts Akihiko to think about the pattern that he's starting to notice regarding strong shadows appearing. Turns out that every time we fought a boss or a strong shadow, that was on a full moon. It's at this moment that we get a last transmission by Mitsuru that warns us that there is something dangerous coming their way. Fuuka is also able to sense the fact that there's someone battling something very powerful at the entrance of Tartarus. This gets the group moving very fast and very quickly. We end up finding a teleporter and making our way back to the entrance of Tartarus. When we get there, we find out that both Mitsuru and Yukari were defeated by two large shadows. They say that nothing seems to be working against these and they don't know what to do. As if things couldn't possibly get any worse, now the bully, the last one, the one that gave us the information about what was going on, is entering Tartarus, possessed by the shadows. Fuuka, upon seeing this, panics and decides to try and protect the bully. This is where she has her awakening, and this is where my issue starts. While her awakening is more sensical and more grounded than Makoto's, no one has shown her how to use the evoker. No one has really explained in detail what the persona is and what she could do with it. She also had the instinct of pointing it at her head, shooting it, and summoning the persona, despite nobody having shown or told her that this is how it works. What's very frustrating about this awakening, though, is that it could have been fixed easily with just one extra little scripted scene. We could have had like a scripted fight against two very weak shadows right before taking the teleporter, where you see Junpei or perhaps Akihiko using the evoker, killing the shadows while Fuuka is staying behind and watching what's happening, and she would have known how to use the evoker. She would have understood, and that would have fixed the entire issue I have here. As I said, it makes more sense than Makoto's, and it's a bit more grounded because she's been directly in contact with the shadows for a little while now. But I find that to be a bit flimsy, and I think that it could have been completely avoided just by having her witness one battle where one of your teammates is scripted to use the evoker. That's it. Either way, we find out that her persona is a navigator type of persona, which leads us immediately into the boss fight, and oh my god, that boss fight was disappointing. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that this boss fight was meant to be a bit underwhelming for a couple of reasons actually. The reason number one is typically something that happened in my playthrough, where I had managed to complete my wing of Tartarus before Akihiko rejoined the party. Because of the exams and everything going on during that month, once I had completed the Tartarus wing, I just didn't return to Tartarus at all. I had a lot more stuff to do to try and raise my social stat. That means that I was also very broke and that Akihiko never got any gear upgrade as a result of that. Not only was it the first time that I even used Akihiko in battle during this boss fight, he was underleveled, undergeared, while being limited to 3 party members for this fight. I believe that the devs had kind of anticipated that this situation could happen to people, so they also made the bosses a bit less difficult. The second reason is that this boss is clearly meant to be a showcase for Fuuka's ability in combat and what she will provide to the team later on. These two bosses have the unique ability of being able to change their affinity in the middle of combat. So Fuuka is able to use her scan ability, more on that later, to figure out their weaknesses, and that's how you defeat the boss. Now, the awakening was very costly in energy for Fuuka, so she passes out and is brought to the hospital by Mitsuru and Akihiko. Nevertheless, you could consider this fight to be a good demonstration of what Fuuka is capable of. We'll soon find out that she will bring a myriad of powerful abilities to the team. I'll be going over these in the gameplay section, but first off, I wanted to talk a bit more about the other party members and the bonds that you form with them over the course of the month of May. In that short month, a lot has happened to the team, and there's a lot that is worth talking about. As I said before, my previous video was limited to the 10th of May in-game, which meant that Akihiko had not rejoined the team by that time. So therefore, that means that by the time Fuuka actually ends up joining us, well, I have 3 whole new members to talk about. There's Akihiko, obviously. There's Mitsuru, who decides to rejoin the combat role instead of being the navigator. And then there's Fuuka herself. Let's start with Akihiko, because on the 29th of May, he actually has an optional event that you can attend where he tries to invite you to dinner but is stopped by his fans. It turns out that he is actually quite popular. So you try and ditch the fans by running away. The problem is those same fans end up running into a gang member of some sort and being harassed by these people. This is where Akihiko is shown to be a quite righteous type of person. He decides to intervene to try and protect the fans, despite the fact that there are 5 thugs and he's alone. This is also when we get a little glance at another character that has been useful to us this whole time but not properly introduced. I'm talking about Officer Kurosawa, the one that sells gear at the mall. Well, he shows up at the end of this cutscene and he frees you from having to go to the police station. It also shows that he has a pretty deep connection with Akihiko and perhaps anybody living at the Iwatodai dorm in general. Someone else that gets a decent amount of exposure during this time is Mitsuru. Upon rejoining the attack group, she has a little speech in the first battle. It's not very long, but it's a very cool way of reintroducing a character and giving her some kind of reawakening, despite the fact that you've been around her since the very start of the game. She's the second character you ever meet. But I've saved the best for last because Yukari gets probably my favorite amount of screen time in this part. So the next time you go back to Tartarus after having Fuuka join your rank, you are also granted a new set of equipment. This equipment is implied to have some special power within it. Sadly, it seems like nobody in the party is able to understand how it works. This is where Yukari gets some kind of redemption arc, if you could say so. At one point your team gets separated, Yukari gets cornered by a shadow. Makoto ends up running into her and he tries to help her, but he gets knocked down by the shadow and almost killed by it. This triggers something in Yukari. Turns out that she had been harboring feelings of insecurity and inferiority this whole time. If you think about it, it makes sense. She was unable to defend you at the very beginning of the game from shadows, and in the last boss fight, she was unable to protect Mitsuru as well. The stress of the situation is so overwhelming for her that she ends up accidentally finding the trigger to use 3G, which is the special power that comes with the gear that you were given. As a result, Yukari becomes the first member to master the use of 3G, which I think is a great way of making her more relevant. Now, since I've mentioned 3G, I think it is time for us to dive into the gameplay chapter of this video. As I've previously mentioned, Fuuka's introduction to the team grants us the use of multiple powerful abilities. The first one is obvious, it's the scan, the one that we saw during the boss fight. The way it works is a little bit tricky actually though. So Fuuka can scan enemies during battle to reveal their affinities, but there's a bit of a drawback to that. She cannot trigger it at the beginning of the battle. You must spend a whole turn before she is able to use it. So in its setup, and also it takes some of her SP to use. This kind of nullifies the criticism that I had mentioned in episode 1, where I had to guess the Shadow's affinities with Mikoto and just swapping between different elements and using a lot of SP. I found that the best way of using this ability of Fuuka is to basically spend the first turn trying to guess the enemy weaknesses, and if I come short by the end of it, use the scan. It's not overpowered, it's not too strong in any way because of the SP cost. You still have to be careful with that, you cannot overuse it. And it turns out that she has some other abilities that will also cost her SP to use. The second ability is called the Jammer. When you're outside of battle, Fuuka can use some of her SP to grant the party invisibility, which allows you to move past most shadows. Not all shadows though. The Reaper is also introduced during this part of the game, and yeah, he's immune to the Jammer. He will spot you regardless. As a side note, I thought it was important to compare Fuuka and Futaba from Persona 5, because Futaba was a very passive navigator. Sure, I mean, she scan floor for you in mementos. She also buffed your party during battle. She could also restore HP and SP for your party member that you had in reserve. But you really did not have to manage her or do anything with her. Those were passives for your team that were just instantly unlocked. I like that Fuuka is a bit more interactive with the player here. You have to manage her SP, you have to make sure that she has the time to set up before scanning enemies. She also gets her own 3G ability, which we'll talk about later. And she can also provide abilities outside of battle, which I find to be very, very cool. The third ability that is enabled by having Fuuka as a navigator is actually not really one of her abilities. Let me explain. So because Fuuka is capable of mapping out floors and also knowing where shadows are, she knows when you've defeated all the shadows around you. Then she will notify you of that, and one of your teammates will say, hey, maybe I can go up and scout ahead. You are given the option to accept or deny that request. If you accept, then your teammate will leave the party for a little bit and go all the way up to the next floor, mapping all of the floor that you're currently on, as well as gathering treasure, items, and everything that they can find. There is a drawback to that, however, because the party member actually doesn't rejoin your party until you ascend to the next floor, meaning that you will have a bit less manpower for the current floor, and if you run into a tough battle, then you may be at a disadvantage. Thus far, I have not encountered a situation where I was actually lacking the manpower. I would imagine that as I keep ascending through Tartarus and as I get to the later floors of the game, things may be a bit more complicated, but that hasn't been the case at this time. So for now, it is pretty chill and you can send out your party members to scout ahead without too much worry. Now let's talk about 3G, which is, I think, the biggest mechanic that was introduced during this arc. 3G reminds me a lot about Persona 5's Showtime mechanic. Basically, it grants the user a unique ability that will bypass any resistances that the enemy might have. However, the way to actually use it in battle is way more complex than Showtime. Instead of a prompt that appears in the middle of battle, 3G is actually a resource that must be charged up before being able to use the ability. What's interesting about it though is that each party member has their own unique way of actually charging up 3G. This is dependent on the party member's personality and also the kind of playstyle that they have. Let's take, for example, Yukari. She gets to charge her 3G a lot faster whenever she's healing teammates, which means that she's actually rewarded for playing into her role. She can just keep healing teammates over and over, and then she can use a devastating wind attack. But on the other hand, for Mitsuru, her way of charging her 3G would be to apply ailments to the enemies. So on top of being a fun and interactive mechanic to use in battle, 3G ends up also highlighting the differences between each of your party members and their personalities. When it comes to Makoto, his 3G is also very unique because instead of having one spell, he has multiple spells that he unlocks by fusing certain personas within the Velvet Room. His basic ability, the one that you unlock at first, is kind of boring. It heals your whole party for 50% health and gives you an evasion boost. That's very much a placeholder ability, so I don't really mind that it's like that. By that point of the game, you've most likely already unlocked the Jack Brother move. This one you unlock by having fused a Jack-o'-lantern and a Jack Frost in the Velvet Room, and that one is actually a very powerful move because it deals almighty damage that's AoE and it hits every enemy in the field. Now, as you start filling up your compendium, you will unlock more and more of these abilities. These require certain pairs of personas to be registered in your compendium to work, which I think is a pretty good incentive to actually doing fusions as much as possible and filling out that compendium. That's it for 3G, and there's one more point I wanted to quickly talk about before moving on to the UX section. In episode 1, I complained about the layout of Tartarus and the fact that it was kind of difficult to ambush enemies. I wanted to say that in the later floors of Tartarus, the layout has changed drastically, and it's actually a lot easier to navigate and also to first strike enemies now. The reason being that there are a lot more pillars and a lot more ways to break line of sight from the enemies, which then allow you to get the first strike more consistently. And with that said, that covers about everything I wanted to mention in this gameplay section for this video. So let's move on to the next chapter. Now, before we go into the conclusion, I still wanted to bring up some user experience related things and just notes, as well as correct myself for certain statements I've made in the first episode. One thing I had claimed in the first episode is that you had to remember every shop and the days that they would host sales. The truth is, I had forgotten that you actually get the chance to be reminded of that by a text that you receive from the shop on your phone on the day of the sale. While this is helpful, it doesn't entirely undo my criticism because that still doesn't simplify week-long planning. You want to minimize the time you spend in Tartarus, right? So you want to be as prepared as possible whenever you do decide to go in. On top of that, Tartarus is also most likely going to be your main way of gaining income in this game. Yes, you can work part-time, but you only earn about 3,000 yen for that, while spending an extra 30 minutes or an hour into Tartarus will lend you about 100k if you know what you're doing. So it doesn't fix the issue entirely, but I still thought it was worth noting that I had forgotten about the phone. I could also complain that the phone is tucked away in the corner, in the top left corner of the screen specifically. It's not as in your face as it was in Persona 5, and I kind of forgot that it even existed as a result of that, but I think that's more on me rather than on the game. So yeah, let's just ignore that. I did have some little pet peeves as well that I wanted to mention. The first one is that at this point of the game, you will always have a party member that stays in reserve. This means that they will stay at the first floor of Tartarus while you go exploring. Something a bit unique about gear in Persona 3 is that some of the pieces of gear that you loot are actually meant to be worn by one party member and no one else. So let's say I don't have Akihiko in my team and I loot some shoes that are made for him. Well, I cannot equip those shoes on him until I go back to the entrance of Tartarus, which could be in 2 minutes or it could be in 45 minutes. I mean, rationally speaking, that makes sense because obviously you are just that far away from the rest of your team. It's not like Persona 5 where the non-active party members were meant to be a little bit behind the main group, right? They were not actually that far away from the rest of the team. But that will lead into a lot of issues for a lot of players, including myself. I'm very likely to forget that I got that piece of gear, and I will probably never equip it as a result until it's already irrelevant. It's not the end of the world, but yeah, again, something I thought I should mention. You wanna know what is the end of the world though? The freaking Velvet Room. Why, you ask? Let me explain. So let's picture this. You go into the development room and you need to do a specific kind of fusion. You know what you want. You know that you have the necessary personas in your compendium and that you just need to summon them. So you go inside of the development room, you sit down, and then you realize, oh, I'm overstocked. I cannot hold more personas right now. In Persona 5, what you would do is back out the conversation, open the menu, and discard a persona that you didn't want. It was already annoying to just have to backtrack out of the menu, but that was fine. But no, not here. That's not how it works here. Instead, what you have to do is exit out of the development room entirely, watch a loading screen, open the menu, do the exact same process, and then walk back in. And God forbid that you made a mistake when you summon a persona and that you have to redo this all over again. They had this figured out in Persona 5 and they had this figured out in Strikers. Why is it not here? It's such a nice quality of life feature. I don't want to sit here and watch 4 loading screens to do just a couple fusions. And you want to know what's stupid about that too? That problem happens in reverse just as well. Elizabeth will ask you to fuse certain personas, and she will also ask you to fuse a certain amount of personas. These are requests that you can fill and you get rewards for. Elizabeth is standing right there in this very velvet room. But no, she's not gonna mention that you actually reached the goal that she set for you. Instead, she will wait until you step out of the room and then you will be able to talk to her about it. Why? Was it that hard? She even has a dialogue box in the velvet room. Why isn't there an option to say, hey, what about the request right here? Okay, maybe I am getting a bit too heated about this, but it's so annoying and it's such a tiny little issue that they could have fixed. And you're going to spend a lot of time in the velvet room altogether. It is a central part of these games. So having to exit out and see the loading screen over and over again is just so grating. But on the other hand, I think it's pretty telling that this is my biggest complaint out of this entire video and this whole arc. So with that said, I suggest that we move on to the conclusion. Yeah, so it wasn't a joke when I said that we had a lot to talk about today. My outlook on the game has improved a lot through this chapter. I thought the story was handled very well. I thought that it was very engaging, and I also really like all the new mechanics that add a lot of fluff to the combat system. Despite all that though, I still have some reservations because the plot has advanced in a very self-contained way. By that I mean, in a vacuum, we've saved Fuuka and now we have another team member, but we still don't really know where the plot is heading. We do get a couple clues here and there, but nothing concrete just yet, which I find quite surprising because at the time of making this video, I have 20 hours of playtime and I still don't really know where things are going, really. Now, if there's one thing that this game has proven to me throughout this arc is that it can move very fast when it wants to. So perhaps I will soon find the answers I need to really understand the plot of this game and where this is going. I also got pretty frustrated because I lost a lot of footage that I had planned to use for the story section of this video. Some of my files got corrupted and some others were simply not recorded properly, so I couldn't make use of them. I also tried some new things throughout this video and throughout the process of making it. A lot of them didn't pay off as much as I would have liked them to, and I'm not too satisfied with the result. But I'm still learning, and as I've mentioned in the first video, this is really new for me. This style of video is really new. Regardless, I hope that you've enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more, please like and subscribe. This really helps me out, and I hope to see you in the next one.